Okay. So there's a circle. It's the great hall of Dhritarashtra of the Kauravas. All of the allied kings, and these are the friends of Duryodhana, the friends of Dhritarashtra, Duryodhana, and Dushashan. They've invited them all there. So they are also seated in the great hall watching over what's about to happen. In the center is the circle. In the middle of the circle is the game of dice. And one half of the circle are Yudhishthir and his four brothers. On the other side of the circle is Shakuni, Duryodhan, Dushashan, Karna, and 4 or 5 other gamblers on their side. So as we know, as we mentioned last week, Shakuni has challenged Yudhishthir, and Yudhishthir is saying, he replies to Shakuni, he says, "My dear Shakuni, gambling, it's a terrible, terrible activity. It is something that completely destroys the principles of dharma, right? Tapa socham dhaya satyam. It destroys the family, it destroys the dynasty. It is something that should never be engaged in a serious fashion." And Duryodhan, he replies to Yudhishthir. He says, "My dear Yudhishthir, we're just family. This is not anything serious. This is just among family and friends. There's no reason why, as family members, we cannot engage in a friendly game of dice." So Yudhishthir says, "I know that's what you're saying, my dear Duryodhan, but I still think that we should not engage in this activity." And then Duryodhan gets a little upset. He says, "Dhritarashtra, my father, invited you here to see this newly built sabha of ours. You've just had a successful opening of your own, Maya Sabha. We've invited you here, Dhritarashtra." Duryodhan is hiding behind his father's name. "Dhritarashtra has invited you here to see our sabha, and he's invited you here to a game of dice. Why did you come here? You knew what the invitation was, for us to have a friendly game of dice. Now you've come here, now you decided you're going to disobey and disrespect the invitation of Dhritarashtra, who's as good as your own father." And then Shakuni chimes in. Shakuni is a very, very nefarious, but very clever character. And he says, Duryodhan, it's okay if Yudhishthir doesn't think he has the ability to challenge us in a game of dice. Maybe he's feeling a little shy. Maybe he's a little afraid of your prowess at the game of dice, your skill at the game of dice. If he doesn't want to, don't push him. We'll just do something else. We don't have to force him to engage in an activity that he doesn't feel ready to do." So Shakuni is very cleverly stoking Yudhishthir's Yudhishthir's ego, essentially, as a Kshatriya. And Yudhishthir says, "My dear Shakuni, I know what you're trying to do. I'm not going to engage in this game simply because you are trying to stoke or poke my false ego. But it is simply because Dhritarashtra, who is senior to me, who is as good as my father, is because he has invited me here, he has required us to come. Because of his invitation, I will not disagree, I will not desist from this game. So please, Duryodhan, let's play." And then Duryodhan, he switches up the rules. He says, "Well, my wealth is against your wealth, but Shakuni will roll the dice and will actually play the game on my behalf. He is as good as me. Whatever he says, you can consider that it's coming from my mouth and my commitment." And Yudhishthir says, "This is very unorthodox. This is not the way the game of dice is played. This is not the way that this particular game of gambling is not played. Already, even before the start of the match, you're already twisting things to suit, to favor outcomes that are best for you. This is not the way the game should be played." And Duryodhan says, "There's no worry. Again, we're amongst friends, but if you feel like you cannot play, you feel like you don't have the skill level, perfectly fine, I'll just play with my friends." Yudhishthir, "No, because Dhritarashtra has invited me here, is because of him, I will continue to make this I will continue to engage in this game of dice. Also remember, we talked about this last week, the vow that Yudhishthira made back in Indraprastha after the Shishupal episode. It was because Shakuni also knew of that vow that he took this opportunity to try to manipulate, not try, to particularly manipulate Yudhishthira, because Yudhishthira had made that vow he will never disagree with his family members. So both Shakuni and Duryodhana are manipulating Yudhishthira based on that vow. So Yudhishthira says, I wager 10,000 jars of this very valuable, particularly valuable type of pearl. Only Yudhishthira has these types of pearls. And Yudhishthira says, what will you wager, my dear Duryodhana? And Duryodhana says, I also have some very rare gems, 10,000 jars of these rare gems. I wager these against your wager. Shakuni picks up the dice, throws the dice. Yudhishthira loses. Bhima, Arjuna, Nakul, and Sahadev, they're sitting there, and they're already upset. They already can understand that this entire gambling match is already being rigged against them. They tell that Yudhishthira is being manipulated. Already they're changing the rules of the game. Shakuni throws, Yudhishthira loses. Shakuni says, what do you have more? Yudhishthira says, oh, I wager my chariot. A gasp goes up in the entire hall, because Yudhishthira Maharaj had a very famous, well, not as famous as Arjuna's chariot, but had a very unique chariot. His chariot was drawn by 8 white horses, had a number of different flags on it. Since the Rajasuya Yajna, he's had this chariot. So it was a very, very unique, very much talked about chariot. So Yudhishthira says, I wager that chariot, the imperial chariot. Shakuni rolls the dice. Yudhishthira loses. Dushasana is sitting there, and he starts swaying and laughing.
What did Duryodhana have to equal this chariot?
Duryodhana didn't put in a wager. Simply Yudhishthira. At least the Mahabharata doesn't tell us what Duryodhana wagered. Shakuni starts laughing. Dushasana starts laughing. Karna is smiling. And all of these kings that have come to watch this gambling arena, they're all Duryodhana's friends. So even they start laughing and smiling that the imperial chariot of Yudhishthira has been lost. And Shakuni says, what do you wager next? Yudhishthira says, all of the wealth that was brought to Indraprastha for the Rajasuya Yajna, all that wealth that has not already been given in charity, whatever's left over of that wealth, I wager that wealth. Shakuni rolls the dice. Yudhishthira loses. Shakuni says, what do you wager now? Yudhishthira says, all of the wealth that Arjuna brought back from the north, when Arjuna went north to conquer the north, all the wealth that Arjuna conquered from the northern territories and brought back to Indraprastha, I wager that. Shakuni rolls the dice. Yudhishthira loses. Yudhishthira is becoming more and more involved, more and more intensely challenged by this game. And Shakuni was very, very manipulative. His skill is not only at the game of dice, but his skill is at actually psychologically manipulating the other person to get them to wager and to bet more and more. And this is how we know gambling is actually an addiction in the brain. Something is manipulated, something goes wrong chemically and in the brain where gambling becomes an addiction, a very, very strong addiction. And Shakuni knew how to manipulate a person's brain so that gambling becomes an addiction. And then with his dice, he would cheat and take advantage of the addiction that he has facilitated in the other person, in his opponent. So Shakuni is using words to draw Yudhishthira more into this game of dice. And Bhima, he's looking at his brother. Yudhishthira and Arjuna, Nakula, they're both looking at Yudhishthir. Now, they're not objecting. Bhima is not objecting. Arjuna is not objecting. They're not objecting to what Yudhishthir is doing, though they see where this is going. That Yudhishthir is getting more and more losing control over his faculties. Kunti Devi has raised the 5 Pandavas to never argue with one another, particularly after the death of Pandu and the passing away of Madri, right? She has raised the 5 boys, Yudhishthir, Bhim, Arjuna, Nakul, and Sahadev, to never argue, to never fight with one another, to always stay in agreement or to work out their differences as much as possible, because she knew that history has always shown that when you have 5 powerful personalities, it's very easy for the 5 of them, even if they're brothers and family members, can fight amongst each other and destroy one another. She was very much aware of this, especially because 3 of the boys, Yudhishthir, Bhima, and Arjuna, are her biological sons, but 2 of her sons are not. So it's very easy for 3 against 2, and it can be a complete mess. So as a mother, she was able to properly train these 5 boys, who are all very powerful in their own mind and in their own heart. She was able to raise them in such a way that they would never, in public, disagree or argue with one another. Behind the scenes, they would have disagreements, but never, ever in public would the Pandavas challenge one another in view of everyone else. They would always work on their disagreements in private. So now Bhima, he's looking at Yudhishthir, but he's not saying anything. Arjuna is looking at Yudhishthir, but he won't say anything. Nakul and Sahadev as well. They're waiting for Yudhishthir to turn to them and ask them a question. Because once Yudhishthir asks them a question in a public setting, then they feel free to actually tell and say something to Yudhishthir. Shakuni knows this. Shakuni knows that these 5 boys were brought up in such a way that in public they will never contradict one another, and they certainly will never contradict Yudhishthir in public. Shakuni knows this. So he's always, every time Yudhishthir starts to turn towards Bhima, and particularly Sahadev, because Sahadev is known of the 5 Pandavas to be an expert in the Vedas. He is an expert advisor. He was actually one of the primary advisors to Yudhishthir, more so than Bhima and Arjuna. He was a primary advisor to Yudhishthir in terms of principles of dharma, Rajniti, politics. Sahadev was very, very well read, very, very knowledgeable. So when Yudhishthir would start to turn towards Sahadev to ask for his opinion or to get his input, Shakuni would immediately say, "So, my dear Yudhishthir, what are you ready to wager net? I see you've lost all of this. Why don't you wager something to try to get it back? Or if you're too afraid to, then of course then you can just take your brothers and you can go back to Hastinapur and we will take the victory. But so far you've only been losing. If you want to go back to Indraprastha having been known as a loser, that's perfectly fine." So every time this would happen, every single time Yudhishthir would start to turn towards Arjuna, start to turn towards Bhima, start to turn towards Sahadev to get their input, Shakuni would say something, grab his attention, make him upset, angry, and continue to manipulate so that this gambling addiction would take strong hold of Yudhishthir's mind. Bhima, Arjuna, Sahadev, Nakula, they're desperately trying to get Yudhishthir's attention. They're shifting, they're moving, they're clearing their throat. They're trying to get Yudhishthir to break his concentration, break this hold that Shakuni has over his intelligence. This is the nature of gambling. This is why, even in not just one of the principles of dharma is not to gamble, but even in modern society, we know that gambling is a very, very strong and powerful addiction. Families are destroyed because of gambling. Anyways, back to the story. Shakuni says, "You've lost. You've been doing nothing but losing. What else do you have? What more do you have? We've taken everything you own." Yudhishthir says, what do you mean you've taken everything out? You have no idea how rich Indraprastha is. You have no idea how much wealth we now have because of our status as the emperors of the world. So now Shakuni is starting to take over, manipulate Yudhishthir's mind. That Yudhishthir is actually becoming he's showing something that people have never seen before. And that is pride. No one has ever seen Yudhishthir display pride and arrogance. And Shakuni starts to draw that out of Yudhishthir. He's saying, you've run out of wealth. You have nothing else. Now you're just a poor man. You're going to have to go back to Indraprastha and start a business or something. Well, he didn't say that. But he's saying you're losing. You're becoming, you're going to have to start begging again. So he's starting to incite arrogance and pride in Yudhishthir. And Yudhishthir begins to show this. No, Indraprastha, we have so much. We have been given all of this wealth from around the world. I wager all of the wealth that Bhima has brought from the east during the before the Rajasuya Yajna, all of that wealth, I wager it. Duryodhana smiles. Dushashan's in ecstasy. Karna is smiling. Shakuni throws the dice. Yudhishthir loses. Shakuni says, when are you going to win? Are you even capable of winning? I've heard you have a reputation of knowing how to gamble, and that's actually true. Yudhishthir was very well versed in the game of dice, game of gambling. He was very good at it. He's well known for it. And Shakuni says, I've heard you actually know how to gamble really well, but you've come here and all you've done is lost. When are you going to show your prowess as a gambler? Again, he's stoking Yudhishthir's sense of arrogance, pride, ego. Yudhishthir says, you have no idea what I can do. I'm about to destroy you at this game of dice. I wager all that Sahadev has brought from the east, all the wealth he collected when he went, south, all of that wealth, I wager it. Duryodhana, he can't believe how well this is going according to plan. Karna is smiling from ear to ear. Dushashan is at this point practically laughing out loud. All these kings who are Duryodhana's friends, they are completely like, oh my God, and they're laughing and they're joking. Oh my God, what is this guy doing? Shakuni throws the dice, Yudhishthir loses. Yudhishthir says, all the wealth, even before Shakuni can ask him, Yudhishthir says, all the wealth from the east. Nakula went to the east, Nakula went to the east and Sahadev to the south. It may be the other way around, but anyways. All of the wealth that Nakula brought from the east for the Rajasuya Yajna, I wager all of that wealth. Shakuni says, are you sure? He's not trying to be, he's not seeking Yudhishthir's benefit. He's saying, are you sure, in a sarcastic sense? Are you sure? Is this the last of your wealth? If you wager this, you're going to lose everything. Yudhishthir says, you have no idea how much we have. You have no idea what the possibility of things I have, the number of things I have to wager. Yes. Shakuni smiles, rolls the dice. Yudhishthir loses. Bhima, Arjuna, Nakul, and Sahadev, they just cannot believe what's happening. And they're doing everything they can to get Yudhishthir's attention. Yudhishthir is not ignoring them. It's not that Yudhishthir is actively ignoring them. It is just Shakuni is so good at manipulating Yudhishthir and grabbing his entire attention to this game. And it's actually, even marketers in this day and age, they know this. They can grab your attention and keep your attention so that you do not come to your senses and not buy some foolish thing in the store. They're very good at this. Shakuni was the original marketing psychologist. He kept Yudhishthir's attention focused solely on the game, and he kept Yudhishthir emotionally tied to it. He made Yudhishthir feel upset, angry, arrogant. All these emotions are very high. And when these emotions take over, we all know the verse, right? Dhyayato vishayam pumsa. Anger, loss of intelligence, loss of memory. Shakuni did all of this to Yudhishthir, and people are just astounded by what's going on here. Finally, Yudhishthir says, all of the land that is under the control of, what time is it? All of the land that is under the control of Indraprastha, I wager it. Yudhishthira loses. This means that everything, all of the land outside of Indraprastha, like land that was given to the Pandavas that's not physically in the boundary of Indraprastha, so they own land outside of Indraprastha, all that land was taken away. Dhritarashtra is sitting on the throne, and he is smiling. I mean, he can't see anything, but he's smiling from ear to ear. And he has an assistant next to him. And every time he hears what Yudhishthira has lost, when Shakuni says, I have won, Dhritarashtra turns to his assistant. What has Yudhishthira lost? And then the assistant has to say, oh, Yudhishthira lost all the wealth from the north. And then Shakuni says, I have won. And then Dhritarashtra would turn to his assistant. What has he lost? What has he lost? And then the assistant would tell him. So each time Dhritarashtra would turn to his assistant and gleefully ask, what has he lost? What has he lost? Bhishma is sitting there and he's looking down. Dronacharya is looking down. He cannot pick his head up and witness what's going on here. Kripacharya, some versions say Kripacharya was looking down. Some versions say Kripacharya was meditating. Whatever was happening, Kripacharya was there, but he wasn't saying anything. Vidura was the one person, he was like the Pandavas. He was trying to get the attention. He was looking at Bhishma like, are you watching this? He wasn't saying anything. He would, turn to Dhritarashtra. Dhritarashtra is blind, and Dhritarashtra is completely engrossed in hearing from his assistant what the Pandavas are losing. There's no point in turning to Dhritarashtra. Vidura turns to Dronacharya. Dronacharya is looking down. Vidura looks at Kripacharya. And of course, again, depending on the version, Kripacharya is either in meditation or he's also just not paying attention. And Vidura is looking around. All the kings, Duryodhana has packed the entire parliament, the entire hall, with all of his people. So all of his people, no one is raising, they're enjoying this. They're watching highway robbery right in broad daylight. Shakuni says, what more do you have? You're still a loser. How can you call yourself an emperor when all you've done is come here and just lost time after time after time? You've got to at least win at least one round. At least one round. Even if it's something small, at least win one round. You can go back and not be completely insulted and humiliated. Again, the psychology of Shakuni is brilliant. They've lost all the wealth. They've lost the land. Now Yudhishthira starts to wager people. He says, I have been given thousands upon thousands of artists, painters, dancers, musicians, all kinds of craftspeople are now under the employment of Indraprastha. These people, they create wonderful festivals. These people put on wonderful events. I wager all of them to you, and I wager their salaries. In other words, these people are all being paid. Yudhishthira said, I wager the money necessary to pay all these people, not just the people themselves. Shakuni rolls the dice. Yudhishthira loses. Yudhishthira says, I wager all of the soldiers of the army who are not Kshatriyas. This is actually very important. Many of the members, many soldiers of the time, not all soldiers are Kshatriyas in the Vedic time. Many soldiers, in fact, most soldiers are actually Shudras who are being paid to, now they're great warriors, they're great fighters, they're very, very accomplished warriors, but they're actually Shudras being paid to fight for a particular king. Or they choose to fight out of loyalty, but they are Shudras in that capacity. So Yudhishthira says, all of such soldiers who are non-Kshatriyas, I wager all of them. And Yudhishthira's army, the imperial army, is enormous after the Rajasuya Yajna. And when everyone hears this, they recognize what is being wagered. First of all, he's wagering people. Second of all, he's wagering the entire imperial army with the salaries to maintain them. All of the kings like, oh my God. People are bated breath. Is he actually going to lose his entire army? And Duryodhana, when he hears this, he is completely overjoyed because now the Pandava's army is already 2 to 3 times twice his own army. If he gets the Pandava army, his army is he's now the most powerful Kshatriya in all of Bharat. Karna, he loves this because now he is not the commander-in-chief of Duryodhana's army, but he and Duryodhana are so close that Karna knows that any army of Duryodhana is going to be commanded by himself. Duryodhana is definitely going to put his army under the command of Karna. So Karna loves the fact that he can finally be the commander-in-chief of the largest army on the face of the planet. So Karna is really interested in how this round of betting is going to go. Shakuni rolls the dice. Yudhishthira loses. Karna his eyes are this big with the excitement of the fact that he has won. He feels that he has won this army because, of course, Duryodhana is going to give it to him to be the commander. And as a whole, everyone cannot believe what has just happened. Wealth is one thing, but the entire army? Shakuni says, what more do you have? You don't have anything else. Yudhishthira says, the kingdom of Indraprastha, the capital city, the imperial seat of our family. I wager that. Bated breath. He loses. Vidura stands up. He cannot have any more of this. Bhima is furious. But he's still holding it, and he cannot say anything. He doesn't want to say anything, not in public. Arjuna doesn't know what's going on. Bhishma's not doing anything. Drona's not doing anything. Kripacharya is in meditation somewhere. Vidura has had enough. He stands up, and for the first time, he raises his voice loudly to Dhritarashtra. He turns to Dhritarashtra and says, my dear Dhritarashtra, you have to stop this. You have no idea what's going on. At this moment, Dhritarashtra is listening to his assistant tell him that the Pandavas had just lost Indraprastha. So Dhritarashtra is happily hearing this good news, and it's interrupted by Vidura. And Dhritarashtra says, my dear Vidura, there's nothing I can do. This is all up and then Dhritarashtra, as usual, starts giving a Bhagavatam class. Oh no, this is fate. This is the will of the Supreme. Who are we to stop what being ordained by the Supreme? And he's giving this Bhagavatam class. And Vidura says, what are you saying? How can you possibly sit here and allow this to happen? You are responsible for the well-being of your family, and you're sitting here and you're watching Duryodhana literally put a noose around his neck. You have to stop this from going on. Duryodhana, he hears this. For the first time, Duryodhana verbally insults Vidura in public. He has contradicted Vidura in the past in small little meetings. Remember before, I believe, in the story, the episode of Varanavat, the House of Fire, Vidura was against it. Duryodhana had to argue with him, but that was also a semi-private meeting with just, Dushashan, Karna, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura. This was now in open court. Duryodhana said, Vidura, sit down and be quiet. Now this is a shocking statement for Duryodhana to say to his superior. Vidura is his senior. Vidura is his uncle. He says, Vidura, sit down and be quiet. If you want to be engaged in any kind of discussion, go to where the old people are discussing the Vedas. And go there and discuss the Vedas, whatever you want to discuss with a bunch of old people. Leave us alone here. Everyone is shocked to hear Duryodhana speak that way to Vidura. No one has ever spoken that way to Vidura, certainly not in public. Vidura ignores Duryodhana. He knows that Duryodhana's a moron. There's just no question. Sorry, that's me speaking. What time is it? It's well past time. Let's wrap it up. Vidura knows there's no point even talking to Duryodhana. He just ignores Duryodhana. He turns back to Dhritarashtra. He says, Dhritarashtra, you know that when Duryodhana was born, Vyasadeva told you that all the signs, all the omens in the sky, in the world, were indicating that the birth of this child was inauspicious and dangerous for the family. Vyasadeva told you at that time to abandon this child, to give up this child. Dhritarashtra again begins to give a Bhagavatam class. Well, no, how can the father, is the duty of the father to always take care of the child, is the duty of this, and what can we do? It's fate, it's this, it's that. Vidura says, no, absolutely not. Of course, the father is supposed to take care of the child, but we see, and Vidura gave a very interesting example. He says the Bhojas, the Andakas, the Vrishnis, when Kamsa went crazy, went to the point where he was going to kill his sister, he imprisoned his own father, Ugrasena, he imprisoned the Bhojas, the Andakas, all of the family members, they abandoned him, they left him. And he was only surrounded by, of course, his cronies, Jarasandha and a few others. But Vidura says it is perfectly permissible to save the family that you abandon such persons. The Andakas abandoned Kamsa, the Vrishnis abandoned Kamsa, the Yadavas abandoned Kamsa, the Bhojas abandoned Kamsa. These are all his family members. They abandoned him when he started acting like an idiot. You should abandon Duryodhana because he's going to destroy the family. When Krishna killed Kamsa, the Bhojas came back, the Andakas came back, the Vrishnis came back, the Yadavas came back. Now they are more powerful than ever and they're flourishing. But that one Kamsa almost destroyed that entire dynasty. You have to let Duryodhana go. He's going to destroy the Kaurava dynasty. Dhritarashtra begins to talk a Bhagavatam lecture about the Supreme is in charge. What can we do? It's beyond my ability to stop it. I'm just a pawn in floating on a boat in an ocean of fate. Shakuni, he recognizes something. He recognizes that if Vidura continues to speak, he's going to get through, not to Dhritarashtra. Shakuni is not worried about Dhritarashtra because Shakuni knows Duryodhana can handle Dhritarashtra. Shakuni is not worried about Bhishma because Bhishma is always going to do, Bhishma is bound to do what Dhritarashtra tells him to do because of his vow, right? Bhishma said, I will never contradict whoever is seated on the throne of Hastinapur. So Shakuni is not worried about Bhishma. Shakuni is not worried about Dronacharya because Dronacharya has long since shown that he will support Dhritarashtra. And Kripacharya has a small voice. He's in meditation somewhere. I mean, he was there physically, but Kripacharya did not. Kripacharya would go where Dronacharya goes. Kripacharya's sister was married to Dronacharya. Shakuni is not worried about any of them. Shakuni is worried about Yudhishthir. Shakuni is worried that if Yudhishthir continues to hear Vidura, it's going to penetrate, it's going to get through to Yudhishthir. Yudhishthir is going to come to his senses and put a stop to this. So Shakuni jumps up and says, wait a minute, Vidura. And he tries to calm down Duryodhana because Duryodhana is just making everything worse. He interrupts Duryodhana, interrupts Vidura. He says, wait a minute. Vidura's right. Let's all just calm down and just let Yudhishthir decide what he wants to do. So he shuts down Vidura and he brings all the attention back to Yudhishthir, which is what he wants. And he says, Yudhishthir. So he starts working his psychological warfare on Yudhishthir's mind. I am well over time, so we'll stop here and we'll continue next week. Hare Krishna.
Can you do 10 more minutes?